Hey, happy Good Friday. Pastor Scott here. You know, as a kid growing up, I had trouble understanding why this day was called Good Friday, the day that Jesus was brutally crucified on a cross. You know, we had a book in our home when I was a kid that was full of photos of great pieces of art, uh, great paintings by the masters depicting different biblical scenes from the Old Testament through the New Testament. And there was a picture of Jesus dying on the cross, nails driven through his hands and feet, crown of thorns thrust upon his head. It was the scariest picture in that entire book. And yet I was fascinated by it. I wanted to look at it, and yet I didn't want to look at it because it was so horrible and sad and disturbing. And I would take that book away by myself sometimes, and I would slowly leaf through its pages, and I'd get right to the page before the picture of Jesus on the cross, and I would stop and pause, and I'd take a breath, and finally I'd turn that page, and I would look at the cross and Jesus on it as long as I could stand it, and then I would shut the book, close the book, and put it away. And so one day I took the book, and I opened it, and I showed my mom the picture, and I said, "Mom, why in the world do we call this Good Friday? Look how horrible this is." And she said, "Listen, it's not because it was painless for Jesus to be on the cross, or he was happy to be on the cross, like it felt good to be on the cross. No," she said, "it's because of what him going to the cross accomplished. That our sins were taken care of, that our sins were paid for, that we could experience grace and forgiveness because he paid our debt. And because he paid our debt, we could share in his new life and live eternally with God." You see, our sins were such a problem that Jesus had to die for us, and yet he loves us so much, he was glad to die for us. I want to tell you or read you a story right now that I wish I had heard back when I was a kid, struggling with trying to understand the good of Good Friday. It's by Walter Wangren Jr., and it's called The Ragman. "I saw a strange sight. I stumbled upon a story most strange, like nothing in my life, my street smarts, my sly tongue had ever prepared me for. Hush, child. Hush now, and I will tell it to you. Even before the dawn one Friday morning, I noticed a young man, handsome and strong, walking the alleys of our city. He was pulling an old cart filled with clothes, both bright and new, and he was calling in a clear tenor voice, 'Rags!' Ah, the air was foul, and the first light filthy to be crossed by such sweet music. 'Rags! New rags for old! I take your tired rags!' Now this is a wonder, I thought to myself, for the man stood 6'4", and his arms were like tree limbs, hard and muscular. His eyes flashed intelligence. Could he find no better job than this, to be a ragman in the inner city? I followed him. My curiosity drove me, and I wasn't disappointed. Soon the ragman saw a woman sitting on her back porch. She was sobbing into a handkerchief, sighing and shedding 1,000 tears. Her knees and elbows made a sad X. Her shoulders shook. Her heart was breaking. The ragman stopped his cart. Quietly, he walked to the woman, stepping around tin cans, dead toys, and Pampers. 'Give me your rag,' he said gently, 'and I'll give you another.' He slipped the handkerchief from her eyes. She looked up, and he laid across her palm a linen cloth so clean and new that it shined. She blinked from the gift to the giver. Then as he began to pull his cart again, the ragman did a strange thing. He put that stained handkerchief to his own face, and then he began to weep, to sob as grievously as she had done, his shoulders shaking. And yet she was left without a tear. 'This is a wonder,' I breathed to myself, and I followed the sobbing ragman like a child who cannot turn away from a mystery. 'Rags, rags, new rags for old,' he sang. In a little while, When the sky showed gray behind the rooftops and I could see the shredded curtains hanging out black windows, the ragman came upon a girl whose head was wrapped in a bandage, whose eyes were empty. Blood soaked her bandage. A single line of blood ran down her cheek. Now the tall ragman looked upon the child with pity, and he drew a lovely yellow bonnet from his cart. "Give me your rag," he said, tracing his own line on her cheek, "and I'll give you mine." The child could only gaze at him while he loosened the bandage, removed it, and tied it to his own head. The bonnet he set on hers. And I gasped at what I saw, for with the bandage went the wound. Against his brow it ran a darker, more substantial blood. It was his own. "Rags, rags, I take old rags," cried the sobbing, bleeding, strong, intelligent ragman. The sun hurt both the sky now and my eyes. The ragman seemed more and more to hurry. "Are you going to work?" he asked a man who leaned against a telephone pole. The man shook his head. The ragman pressed him. "Do you have a job?" "Are you crazy?" sneered the other. He pulled away from the pole, revealing the right sleeve of his jacket, flat, the cuff stuffed into the pocket of that jacket. He had no arm. "So," said the ragman, "give me your jacket and I'll give you mine." So much quiet authority in his voice. The one-armed man took off his jacket. So did the ragman. And I trembled for what I saw, for the ragman's arm stayed in its sleeve. And when the other put it on, he had two good arms, thick as tree limbs. But the ragman, he had only one. "Go to work," he said. After that, he found a drunk lying unconscious beneath an old army blanket, an old man, hunched, wizened, and sick. He took that blanket and wrapped it around himself, but for the drunk, he left new clothes. And now I had to run to keep up with the ragman. Though he was weeping uncontrollably and bleeding freely at the forehead, pulling his cart with one arm, stumbling for drunkenness, falling again and again, exhausted, old and sick. Yet, he went with terrible speed. On spider's legs, he skittered through the alleys of the city, this mile and the next, until he came to its limits, and then he rushed beyond. I wept to see the change in this man. I hurt to see his sorrow. And yet I needed to see where he was going in such haste, perhaps to know what drove him so. Well, the little old ragman, he came to a landfill. He came to the garbage pits. And I wanted to help him in what he did, but I hung back, hiding. He climbed a hill. With tormented labor, he cleared a little space on that hill. Then he sighed. He lay down. He pillowed his head on a handkerchief and a jacket, and he covered his bones with an army blanket. And he died. Oh, how I cried to witness that death. I slumped into a junked car, and I wailed and mourned as one who has no hope, because I had come to love the ragman. Every other face had faded in the wonder of this man, and I cherished him. But he died, and I sobbed myself to sleep. I did not know. How could I know that I slept through Friday and Saturday and its night too? But then on Sunday morning, I was awakened by a violence. Light, pure, hard, demanding light slammed against my sour face, and I blinked and I looked and I saw the first wonder of all. There was the ragman folding the blanket most carefully, a scar on his forehead, but alive. And besides that, healthy. There was no sign of sorrow or of age, and all the rags that he had gathered shined for cleanliness. Well, then I lowered my head, and trembling for all I had seen, I myself walked up to the ragman. I told him my name with shame, for I was a sorry figure next to him. Then I took off all my clothes in that place, and I said to him with a dear yearning in my voice, "Dress me." Oh, he dressed me. My Lord, he put new rags on me, and I am a wonder beside him. The ragman, the Christ. Have a happy, good Friday.